So then, once we created this graph, we of course want to find clusters in the graph. Or as I said, they're called communities when we're dealing with graphs, but I tend to call them clusters regardless. And the main idea is that we want to find a group of vertices with more edges inside the group than to the rest of the graph. So basically here, all of these, I mean, this is super simple example. All of these have a lot of interconnections, but very few connections to the rest of the cells here. So this is a very clear community. Well, in this case here, it can be two communities or just one big community, because everything here is a bit interconnected. So to find communities, we have to split the graph. We do graph cuts. And we calculate the cost of splitting. And there's a lot of different ways of doing this. You can just simply do the smallest cut that cuts the fewest edges, but that's not very useful when you're trying to find clusters, because then you would just get a lot of singletons. So we want to find the best cut. And I mean, visually, it sometimes looks very easy, but computationally, it's not so easy always. So we use something called normalized cut, which is basically the cost of cutting here as a fraction of the total edge connection. So basically the cut here would split two edges here with 0.1 and 0.2. So the cut cost is 0.3. But then the volume of this and this part, you add together all the weights on both sides. And the normalized cut would then be the cut cost divided by these two volumes. So you see this one has a fairly small cut cost of 0.24. But if we would cut here, as you see, these edges have very high weights. The cut cost would be quite high. So in this very small example, this is the optimal normalized cut in this graph. But to test for all possible cuts in a graph of 10,000 single cells is a very big computational problem. So for that reason, there's a lot of different heuristic methods to solve this problem. In the single cell field, Louvain and Leiden has become super popular. I think the main reason is that it's fairly fast methods. I have not seen any study showing that it's actually the best methods, but they're good enough. You might see other methods as well, but the Louvain and Leiden are right now the most commonly used. But if you really go into graph theory, there are hundreds of different methods for actually doing these kind of community detections. But some are super slow that I've tried out. So if you then go back to the single cell data, we need to define distances between our cells. And the most common thing to do is to take PCA space. We define how many principal components we want to use, and we calculate Euclidean distance in that space. But there are other options. You can try out different things. And also when we do hierarchical clustering or anything, it will be mainly Euclidean distance in PCA space. Then we build a KNN graph with the cells as vertices. And the size of K will clearly influence the structure you have in your network. With very large K, you get very interconnected graphs. It might just end up as a big blob if you start increasing K too much. And many methods also then refine the KNN graph to this SNN graph. Then we use community detection methods to find clusters. And as Paulo already talked about, graphs can be useful for other things. They're included for dimensionality reduction, in trajectory analysis, and a lot of other types of analysis.
I can also just add one small detail.
Yeah.
In the previous exercises, you have done data integration. So using, for example, creating the MNN space or the scanorama space, the harmony space. So those are also PCA. In that case, you will not run specifically on PCA, but on these integrated spaces to run, for example, clustering on the integrated data.
Yeah, so when you do clustering after integration, it would be CCA space, MNN space, or harmony space, whatever integration method you use beforehand. And I should also mention that pretty much all of these methods are graph-based methods. So you create graphs between a network with shared neighbors between the different data sets. If you really want to get into playing with networks, I suggest looking at the iGraph package. In the back end of all of these other packages, they use the iGraph package. It's really well documented and developed for building graphs for all types of data. So here are just some links to some tutorials to iGraph, and also some examples with the single cell data set that we had as a lab before in the course. It is super easy once you just learn the package to play around with graphs on your own.